Hi, and welcome to Conectados, a weekly space where we connect with resources, with technology, with ideas, with neighbors, with stories, and so much more. I am your host, Cris Oviedo, and I am very happy to be with you today. Conectados is a space that looks to connect us to one another and bring us together. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and today we will connect with this topic and we will also connect with some of the events happening in Howard County this weekend. But first, I wanted to remind you all that early voting starts today. Today, Thursday, October 24th through October 31st, including Saturday and Sunday. You can vote from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. each one of these days. Please note that as long as you are in line by 8 p.m., you will be able to cast your vote. If you prefer to wait, Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. So whether you vote early, whether you vote the day off, just please make a plan, vote, go and exercise your right to vote. Make sure you raise your voice. Halloween is next week, and this annual tradition of candy and customs depicting monsters, superheroes, fictional and real characters, food and animals, and a wide variety of things is a very old tradition. I'm going to share a quick video here with you. This is a very, very old tradition that dates back over 2,000 years and originated back in Europe with the Celts, who celebrated their new year on November 1st, closing the summer season and getting ready for the season of harvesting and darkness, representing a fall and winter. And darkness, not in the way that we usually think of darkness as this evil thing, but rather like the natural thing that happens in the winter and the fall, where the days are shorter, the sun doesn't stay for as long as it does in the summer. So that's the darkness that this represented. The Celts believed that on the night of October 31st, the boundaries between the world of the dead and the world of the living became blurry, and that the ghost of the dead came back to cause mischief, damage the crops, and also to tell the future through prophecies that the Celts fully relied upon and in which they actually found hope. To commemorate this night, the Celts made big bonfires and dressed up with animal fur and heads, which is believed to have given way to the tradition of dressing up that we still keep today. Throughout the years, Halloween became more prevalent in some states, but it really wasn't until the second half of the 19th century, when a large number of immigrants came from Europe, that the celebration really took over and people in all states started to join in the festivities. In the United States, Halloween has been used as a way to build community, to bring neighbors together while sharing sweet treats. And, if you're planning to celebrate Halloween, if you're planning to be part of the festivities this year, please keep yourself and your family safe. Walk with your kids. Go trick or treating with neighbors that you know. Take a flashlight, please, with you so that you can see where you're walking, but also so that cars that may be coming might be able to see you as well. And the most important part, pick the big pieces of candy out of the bag for yourself. I mean, that's really what Halloween is all about. No, but in all honesty, I know that we have different feelings about Halloween many times, and I know for us immigrants, sometimes we choose not to celebrate, and that's okay. But I just felt that it was important to try to understand where it comes from. I am a person who likes to know about other cultures and about other celebrations and understand them. And I found it very interesting that to see the evolution of Halloween as a farming tradition, as a way of a culture to even come together and prepare for the new season to what it is today. So just a little bit of history this morning. October is how it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is a reality that affects over 12 million people in the United States annually. On average, in the United States, every minute, a total of 24 people are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by their partner, which means that in the next 60 seconds that you and I spend listening to this conversation, it is 9:06. By 9:07, 24 people will suffer from violence in the United States. And this includes men and it includes women. In fact, if we gather 10 women, chances are that three of them have been victims of domestic violence. And if we gather 10 men, chances are that one of them has suffered from domestic violence. And to talk more about this important topic, I am joined today by Heidi Notario. She is the co-executive director of Caminar Latino, Latinos Unidos por la Paz y la Equidad. Heidi, who is originally from Cuba, or Cuba, as we say it, I guess, in English, has a wealth of expertise in community organizing, disability, racial justice activism, and the application of linguistic justice center participatory methodologies to guide practice and evidence building efforts. Heidi has dedicated over 2 decades to advocating for the rights of gender based violence survivors. She has been focusing on Latinx, individuals with disabilities, and deaf communities. She actively works at the intersections of violence against people of color, LGBTQ plus individuals, persons with disabilities, and immigrant communities. In addition, Hyde is deeply committed to addressing the connections between housing insecurity and gender based violence, with a specific emphasis on racial inequities and lack of sovereignty. With a human rights framework, a trauma informed lens, and through the application of linguistic justice approaches, she places a strong emphasis on accessibility and strives to eliminate barriers that affect survivors with intersecting identities, their children, and communities. Heidi approaches her work and personal life with a focus on transformative justice, community building, and healing. And it's really for me an honor to bring Heidi here on stage and join us this morning. Thank you so much for taking the time and making the space to come and share with me in Conectados, Heidi. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for the invitation.
Oh, absolutely. And everything that I just read sounds sounds like the perfect world, really. Sounds like what we should all be focusing on, right? Just building a good world for every person. Um, Tell us a little bit about your story. Tell us a little bit about your journey to Caminar Latino and, how you got involved in this work.
Well, as you were reading, my entry into the anti-violence movement in the United States really began with doing disability justice work. So, really working to center the rights of people with disabilities and deaf people. And in that space, I became in contact with, I remember a Latina with a developmental disability who was experiencing sexual violence in the home. So that just opened the door to a world of inequities at a level that I was not prepared to encounter. In her case, there was a disability issue and also the language barriers and cultural challenges because she encountered a system that was not ready to welcome her, even though had been in existence for decades. And I'm referencing now the anti-violence movement, right, that has been in existence in the United States for over 30 years. I would say, yeah, closer to 40. So that was my entry into the anti-violence movement. And from there, I decided to just concentrate my energy in, into doing that work and trying to remove barriers that impacted survivors from, as you read, intersecting identities to mean people that, in addition to being survivors, were perhaps immigrants, had a disability, perhaps identified as members of the LGBT plus communities, etc. Because the more challenges to access, the more complicated and difficult was their chances to healing and justice.
Hmm. You said something very powerful, a system that wasn't ready
Mhm.
to welcome her. Wow. I mean, that just blows my mind because I think that there's so many instances in which the systems are just not ready to welcome many of the community members who are part of that system for one reason or another, as immigrants or as, identified in different ways. And, we could have a full conversation just about
Sure.
that. That is really powerful and bringing And throughout your entire biography, language, you mentioned the power of language and using language to make transformation. um, I think that that is the biggest tool. We can call it a weapon. I mean, language is one of the most powerful things that we as humans have, and that we can use and utilize to transform systems, to transform lives, to connect with others, to build, to take down, I mean, just to destroy or to build. Like, it's just so powerful. I love that you um place such an importance on language. And I don't know if, I know that this is not what the conversation is about, but I think it has so much to do with when we think of violence. We usually think of it as the physical act of, violating someone else. But language is just as big as a part, and it can be, and sometimes can hurt even more
Mm-hmm.
than that physical pain that can be inflicted on someone else. Would you mind speaking about the power of language, as, like I said, a tool or a weapon, as a means of destruction or construction?
Well, in my case, as you were saying, linguistic justice, because I do want to make a difference there. And in there, I'm talking about equity among languages. So I'm going to
Hmm.
start for the on the positive side of things. When we think about language access, that's usually what
Hmm.
we hear at the government level. There is a law, it's a Title Six, um, that Title Six protects, on paper, and in real life, if people can actually advocate and put that in practice. So the rights of people, and for them not to be discriminated on the basis of their national origin, and language is part of that. So someone that speaks a language other than English should not be discriminated when seeking services.
Hmm.
And this refers to places that receive federal funding, right? Like domestic violence programs, sexual assault programs, and so forth. In that case, there is something powerful, which is the law that protects people that speak a language other than English. Now, the exercise of that is sometimes complicated because who is going to exercise it? Those that don't speak English. So it becomes a thing that's not always doesn't always have a lot of teeth unless people get in contact with those that can support them, advocates, legal advocates, and such. So in that regard, language is important, and as you said, it can be used as a tool to discriminate others and to create a barrier. But I talk about linguistic justice because I'm going beyond access, right? I'm really committed to equity among languages. So not necessarily come to a place and then indicate that I do not speak English and then get a telephonic interpreter, especially when I'm disclosing extreme violence at the height of a traumatic event. So that
Hmm.
is typically the norm. That's the language access. What I'm asking for is that people can communicate in the language in which they feel most powerful. And that is the positive side of it. Now you're referencing, and I'm going to now move to what you're talking about, which is how language can be used as a weapon to cause harm. And in the context of intimate partner violence, you're talking about verbal abuse. So, violence that is not physical, but how words can be used to diminish, to belittle, to really destroy someone's self esteem that leaves no marks. There is no physical evidence of this kind of harm. That in the context of trying to prosecute or file a seek charges against a perpetrator of this kind of violence is very difficult to do because there is
Hmm.
no physical evidence, right? It's
Hmm.
only the psychological harm that is as powerful and debilitating as physical violence, as you're saying. In that case, it's important to recognize that a form of violence, of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, can be verbal abuse. No marks visible. However, the emotional harm can be the impact of that can live for a long time, and for some people forever. It really destroys someone's self-esteem.
Yeah.
So that's very much a form of violence. And
Okay.
that's an example of language being used as a weapon to cause harm.
Yeah. No, and thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for, for elevating, in the system, the importance of language access. I think
Mhm.
that is super powerful, super important. And the example that you gave of, if I'm coming to share some of the most dramatic, some of the most, like, those deep, deep, deep things that I have in my mind, I'm trying to. And in our community, we rely on our children. Our children tend to be, those interpreters for us. And I, I think about it, and I'm like, these are things in many times that they should not be exposed to. Children should not be exposed to. And now, not only that, but they need to interpret my words, translate them to another language, and then make sure that they are understood by another person. So, it just, again, that's a whole different conversation, but it's really powerful, and it's very important to voice it, because if we're talking about domestic violence, and I know that language, especially for the immigrant communities, and it's not just the Latino community, but in general, language can be used, right? As a mean, as a way, and immigration can be used as a mean, as a way to perpetrate violence, as you were very clearly saying. So I think it's important to define domestic violence as we're thinking about, right? That this is the month to bring awareness
Mhm.
around domestic violence. I think it's important to start by defining it and really just naming it so that people can recognize it, because we cannot recognize what we don't know, what we don't name.
Exactly. So yeah, the definition of domestic violence, and this is important that folks really understand, is a pattern of behaviors. This is not something that happens one time, although unhealthy relationships and violence is never okay. But domestic violence really refers to a pattern of behaviors designed to control an intimate partner. So I'm talking about violence that happens over time, and it can show up. We were referencing a moment ago verbal abuse. It could also show up as economic coercion. So someone that really controls the finances. And we've heard of survivors telling stories of being allowed X amount of money a month, people having to hide money and create separate bank accounts as a survival strategy and as a safety plan in order to resist that. Um, it also can show up as chemical abuse, like in the case of people that perhaps need medication and their partners control their medications, withdraw medications, give more than what is recommended. So as a way again of controlling their partner. The physical violence, that's what everybody thinks about, right? When you hear domestic violence, people immediately go into, oh yes, bruises and such. So that is the physical violence. That's the most common known, form of violence in this context. And also, we were making just touching on emotional abuse and coercion, but I think that's really important because sometimes it doesn't even take words. You were talking about verbal abuse, but sometimes there is this level of control that doesn't even require words. Like sometimes just looking at someone in a particular way to really indicate you're out of line, shut up. You don't have to sometimes say what you're thinking, and you can have somebody at the other end be terrified. So I think that's part of emotional abuse and control and coercion. So I think all of these are manifestations of violence. Now,
Mhm.
remember, I'm talking again about a pattern of behavior. So this is the thing that happens over time. We also really take a lot of care and attention to in the context of dating violence. So among younger adults and younger people, um, how these behaviors can show up early on. And unfortunately, sometimes our youth talk about things like jealousy as a, that means he really is into me, the
Right.
jealousy. And jealousy sometimes is an indicator also because it's a controlling behavior to limit somebody. So it's always about control. Sexual violence in the context of an intimate relationship is a form of violence and terrible. And it wasn't recognized at the beginning. Like marital rape, for example, wasn't a thing that was recognized right away. because again, all of these notions of what is expected in relationship, what is expected, and now if we're going to talk specifically in the heterosexual context, notions around gender roles and what is expected of the woman in a relationship, and to please their partner. So all of those norms actually have condoned violence, including sexual violence in a
Mm.
in a couple. So using in that case sex as a weapon of control is a form of violence that cannot be ignored. So there is sexual violence that you referenced when you were talking about statistics, uh, outside of relationships, usually happens by someone that people know, contrary to what we hear about the stranger coming behind the bushes. It's usually somebody that people know. But in the context of an intimate relationship, sexual violence is also a form of intimate partner violence.
Hmm. It's a pattern of behavior. I think
Mhm.
that's key, because I think, also, and recognizing them, right? And help us out, Heidi, because it just, when you're thinking about this, is like, you can recognize certain behaviors in your partner, and that may make you wonder, right? Like like, and I'm thinking about, I have two young kids, and I say young kids, and I say kids, and if they hear me call them kids, they're probably going to be like, we're not kids, mom, anymore. Right? Like, it's a 20 some year old
Mhm.
daughter and a 17-year-old boy, right? And I think about them, and I think about, my personal experience also with relationships, and how I am from Ecuador, and how I met, who is now my husband, and all of the times that we've been together, and how we as a couple, and as persons, have had to mature into who
Mhm.
we are today. And our relationship, I cannot say that I've given him the absolute best relationship at all the time, right? Because I've had to grow, I've had to look inside, I've had to make some adjustments, and recognize some of the things that maybe I was doing that were not conducive to a healthy relationship. Never abusive, right? Because there's a big distinction there.
Mhm.
But there were certain behaviors that if I had I continued, would have probably, not been conducive to continue with that relationship, because they did not allow my husband and myself to be our full persons. It was not healthy behaviors. So thinking about our young people, and thinking about, what we hear today, where even, when you're dating someone, our kids or our youth, they are experiencing violence when they're dating. I think
Mhm.
it's so important, and I really want to dig a little bit more into this, like some of those behaviors that we should be looking out for, and how to recognize, okay, this is something that could definitely lead into that just could really evolve into a situation where my life could even be in danger, right? Is it always that easy to recognize? I guess is a question that I have, because as I'm thinking, how do people go out now and have relationships and find out what are there red flags? Are there things that they,
Mhm.
are there metrics? Like, I don't know. I just, again, because I cannot remember hearing when I was a teenager that there was dating violence. I don't remember
Mhm.
that being a thing. Maybe it
Yeah.
existed, maybe we didn't have social media to tell us those stories, or maybe it just, I don't know, maybe we have evolved into a situation now where we don't know how to recognize it. So help us a little bit with that, because I fear for the youth. I fear for them as they're exploring, and as they're trying to figure out what a healthy relationship is like, that they may not be able to recognize some of the signs, and then find themselves in a domestic violence or in a partner violence situation.
Yeah. No, you're talking about a critical age, 17 and 21. I have a 23-year-old son. And I think, um, and especially raising males, I do think is very important because, again, trying to undo some of the gender roles that many of us grew up with, and
Hmm.
trying to really take down the patriarchy, as many people say, because the root cause, and I think that's important, right, of domestic violence is patriarchy, is this idea of gender superiority, is the notion that someone can control somebody else. Um, so, in my opinion, the most important thing to teach younger people before teaching them what the red flags could be, but I think is for them to have a true understanding of consent. What does
Mm,
consent mean? And I think there are many wonderful tools out there. Um, there's a video that's fantastic that equates consent to inviting someone to have tea, and it's a very simple. It's an animated video. It's British. I'll share that with you later. So if you want to share with your audience, you can. But it's such a simple message indicating that, for example, if someone is asleep, could they would they still be able to consent to wanting tea or not? So really talking about things like if you're under the influence, if you're not conscious, you cannot consent. Any relationship without consent is not a healthy relationship, and that sort of thing. So I think to really get underneath what consent means, consent to everything. I actually have a dear friend who's always about consent, and he always asks for permission to share things like photos that we take together or any little thing at all. So I think that's what we want our youth to be able to embody, is this deep understanding of consent. So there is that, right? And then imagine if everybody knew that, and everyone would walk around making sure that whatever they are about to do, they got verification that is okay to do and engage in, and that at any moment people can change their minds and say, I no longer want this. And that's okay, right? That we would have people with the tools to be able to navigate situations, to know when it's okay to stop something, when so that they can tell themselves if they don't want to engage in something. So
mhm,
I think something like that would really prepare our youth, so really clarity around consent. And then the red flags, right? Because we know they're not always going to be in a situation where people are aware of that. They may encounter someone who may be a perpetrator of violence, or who may be, and I see this with youth sometimes, just they don't have the skills, they don't have the tools, and then they replicate behaviors that perhaps they have observed and don't know how to navigate situations. So red flags, that's why I mentioned jealousy.
mhm,
Jealousy is not okay. It is not cute. It's not cool. It's not a sign of interest or love. And I think that's another thing that we need to really teach our youth. Jealousy is about control. So to really talk about, is it okay, especially I've heard younger folks saying, oh, my boyfriend girlfriend wanted my password to my social media account so they can see what I'm posting, what people post, and to really look at situations as they come. Is that okay, that you have to give access to your everything to that other person? uh, what are boundaries in relationships? So to really early on start talking about that. What are healthy boundaries? To pay attention to not losing themselves in a relationship, and accountability for people that are causing harm. That there is a group of friends that can say, hey, that's not okay. But I think in order to do that, accountability is critical, understanding of consent and boundaries, and to really talk often about healthy relationships, about gender equity, about those kinds of things. And that becomes the norm, because any chance, and remember, any behavior that is controlling is not okay. So I think some of the signs are what I was just describing: someone demanding access to your accounts for social media and such, someone demanding that you text, that you check in constantly. I hear young people talk about that a lot. Oh, so and
mm,
so is mad at me because I didn't text, because I didn't respond to the text immediately. So those are some of the signs, right? Somebody that doesn't want the person to go out with their friends without them, that's also another sign of control. And what happens to survivors of violence in these situations is that they become very isolated. So if people start noticing that it's not okay to go out with their friends anymore because their partner is not okay with that, that's usually a sign that you are in the presence of someone who's very controlling. and you are in an unhealthy relationship. You could be.
Hmm.
Now, I wanted to share a resource though. There is
Yes.
a resource for younger people that's fantastic. Is loveisrespect.org. One word, loveisrespect.org, that is now housed within the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And it gives access to young people to communicate using text. They can chat with somebody, but there are also a bunch of resources there, including a relationship quiz. That's really a fabulous resource. And any of us could take the quiz that asks a number of questions about our relationship. So I
Hmm.
encourage everyone, including people not as young as like us, we all should take the quiz because it has questions that sometimes about things we don't think about necessarily, to really give us a sense of how healthy is our relationship. Again, doesn't mean that everyone is in a domestic violence situation, but if there's things that need to be modified, you were talking earlier about you had to do some growing up in your
Yes.
relationship. We all have, right? So we all have. One thing is to modify something because it's getting to on the verge of not being very healthy. There is that. And then there is coercive control, right? So I think we have to understand the difference, and and respond and get ourselves informed, um, and prepare so that we are
Mhm.
aware.
And I love that you're bringing that up because especially today, I think that we're in a time where we don't want to deal with the hard things sometimes. Like it's easier to just give up. And I mean, please, I do understand if you're listening, if you're watching. I am by no means saying that if you are in a domestic violence situation, that you should stay there and try to work things out. Like if your life is in danger, please find resources. Please make a plan. Um, because that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about, Heidi, this morning. Many times as we look as outsiders, right, and we see somebody who is in a violent situation, we ask and wonder, why is this person still in that situation, right? Why is that person not leaving? Why is that person not escaping? Like it's really easy from the outside when we come to find out that somebody's going through a violent situation, where they have a violent situation at home. As outsiders, many times we want to take action, thinking about that that's going to be what's best for that person. And I want to invite us all, because it was very eye opening to me, and I want to hear what you have to say about this. It was very eye opening to me when somebody said, by you taking action, by you doing something, you could actually be putting in danger, even more in danger, the lives of that person. That the best way to take action is to just listen and to be supportive, um, and allowing the person in the situation to decide what's best for them. And I think that is so hard to do. Um, and that put the brakes on me, because I am somebody who likes to fix things. I am a provider. That's who I am. That's just so, if I see somebody in need, I'm going to try to help that person. That's just who I am. And I'm sure that there are people out there, but by sometimes by doing that, we might be harming. We may be creating more harm rather than actually helping, which would be our intention. So I really want to hear from you, Heidi, on when somebody is in that situation. Both, what can the person do, right? What are some of the things that the person can do? But also, as we are looking from the outside, and if we come to find out that somebody is in that situation, somebody who's dear and near to us, and it's in that situation, what is the best thing for us to do?
I think a couple of things I wanted to address here. And the first one is what you were saying, Chris, about how often we as bystanders wonder, why is that person still in the relationship? One of the things that I think, if there's one thing we take from this conversation today, I would suggest that is, let's flip that narrative on its head, right? The question
Hmm.
isn't why is the person still in the relationship. The question is, why is their abusive partner doing that? And I think that's
Hmm.
what we need to do and ask that instead. why would someone stay in an abusive relationship? Why? So, economic reasons, housing security, fear of losing their children. Because, yes, there are laws that when a survivor or somebody reports violence, at times, um, child welfare could get involved. And people that are survivors of domestic violence oftentimes get charged with something called failure to protect. Because again, comes from the view that if you're in an abusive relationship, why don't you leave? Even though you may become homeless, you may not be able to afford. I mean, the cost of housing in many places now is impossible for someone living just with one income if you have more than one child. Um, so the reality of leaving an abusive relationship is one that is quite hard to do, and quite one to is difficult to do well and safely. The moment that's most dangerous for survivors of domestic violence is when they actually leave the relationship. And why is that? Because the person that was abusing them loses absolute control, right, of the situation. So these things are real, and I think they support why we need to stop asking, why doesn't the person leave, right? So there is that. So you raised something critical a moment ago. You said that you know that what's important is to listen to the person and support them through their journey, right? In essence, until they are ready. And I would say not necessarily ready, I would say until they're able to do something different. There is also the piece around, we've learned from survivors that many don't necessarily want to leave their partners, they just want the violence to stop. So they want, and that's the story of Caminar Latino, actually. They want support for their partners because violence, nobody is born violent. That is a learned behavior. Can everybody change? I'm talking now about people that use violence in relationships. Some can, some actually can change. And we've heard from survivors, and this is very difficult for us to do that do this work, to say, okay, let's work with people that cause violence and cause harm. And historically speaking, the anti-violence movement has not done that work in this country. Now, Caminar Latino has, from the very beginning, and a few years after it was founded, survivors started asking for help for their partners. And that was one of the programs that Dr. Julia Perilla, who is founder of Caminar Latino, decided to embark on, even though she was accused of putting people at risk, and so forth. And she did it because she knew that survivors were not leaving their partners; they just wanted the violence to stop. So that's important. There is that
That's
piece too.
powerful.
Yeah, very powerful. She was definitely a pioneer, a revolutionary, and so there is that, right? So there is the historically there hasn't been work, critical work, you know, for people that cause harm. So now there are some folks doing it. There have been always communities that haven't engaged in that. When we talk today about restorative justice, um, and the principles of that come from indigenous communities and such, is really working with everybody, including those that cause harm, and have
Hmm.
some accountability mechanism, not necessarily relying on the criminal legal response. This isn't about just putting people away and that's it, right? And again, I'm not talking about folks that are capable of killing their partners. That's a
Right,
different group of perpetrators.
right.
But I think that is important to know that until we address the sources of violence and people that cause harm, we're never going to end this kind of violence, right? So there is that. And what can we do as bystanders? I think in the statistics that you were sharing, we know that 1 in 3 women will be survivors of violence in
Yeah.
their lifetimes, right? And we know that men are also survivors of violence. But given the statistics and what we know, men have to be part of the solution
Hmm.
because they're a big part of the problem. And we have to accept that, you know? So, work around prevention and intervention, like as bystanders, really require us to engage men in that work. So if someone tells you and you know that they're experiencing violence, and that's the role of bystanders, that is absolutely critical. There is support for the person leaving the violence, and it's exactly what you said. It's just listen, listen, because one of the most powerful weapons employed by perpetrators is the isolation of the victim of violence.
Right.
So what oftentimes happens is that we get frustrated, right? Oh, she's still in that relationship, and I don't know how many times we're going to talk about this, and they're still there. So we're judging the situation from the outside.
Yeah.
What we know is that, as average, takes a person about 7 attempts to leave their violent relationship until they do it for good.
Hmm.
7 times. So I think, why is that? So I mentioned, right, economic reasons, financial reasons. I didn't even touch on the immigration context.
Mm-hmm.
As another layer, if there is somebody who is undocumented, if there is somebody who is in the process of adjusting their status, and that's something their abusive partner uses against them as a weapon, right?
Right.
So many reasons. So, yes, our role as bystanders, when it comes to the survivor in this case, is to support, no matter how hard it is, to support, to offer resources, to remind them that it's never their fault. Because remember, a lot of times survivors internalize and believe that they deserve this kind of violence. It's not your fault. You have the right to live a life free from violence, and constantly do that and be there and give a listening ear and provide support, and remember that remind them that there are options, that they don't have to live that way. And what happens to the person that's causing the harm? And that's where I want the community to get involved and do something, right?
Right.
And in the same manner that we tend to judge the person that's living in the violent relationship, what are we doing around the person that's causing harm? So I do want the community to get involved and take a stand and hold the person accountable, especially if this is a kind of behavior that we observe publicly. So it isn't about turning a blind eye or thinking that that's between a couple, that's none of my business. I think we have to constantly speak out and speak up about this kind of violence, especially men. They have to get
Mm-hmm.
involved and use any platform they have to to talk about the harms of these kinds of relationships. So I think I answered your question, that supporting what you said, that being
Yeah.
there as a support is very difficult to do, very difficult to do. But remind ourselves we're not the ones in it. So the least we can do is be supportive. And that's hard to do.
What it's so much power, so much power in everything that you just said. I mean, I want to elevate a couple of things. I just want to, you said the most dangerous time. It's important to remember that many times the most dangerous time for a person in a domestic violence situation is when they leave their relationship.
Mhm.
So just I think just understanding that can give us a little bit of an insight of maybe the safer thing, even though it seems counterintuitive for this
Mhm.
person is to actually stay, especially if they don't have a plan, especially if they don't have anyone else, especially if they don't work, if they rely 100% upon this person, you know, leaving that situation, as counterintuitive as it may seem, might be the best thing for that person. Staying there might be the best thing for that person. Leaving might not, right? Might put them in more danger. So
At that
understanding that, I
moment,
think it's
right?
super
Yeah.
powerful because it can maybe help us be a little more understanding and empathetic, right? And
Mhm.
like you said, not get frustrated as easy just by understanding that, right? So powerful, really powerful. Um, Recognizing and accepting that many times the person does not want to leave their partner, that they just want the violence to stop,
Mhm.
that changes the focus of the conversation. That places the responsibility on the person who needs to change the behavior.
Mhm.
That is powerful. That can be transformative. Heidi, that's a way of thinking about around this situation that I don't think it's been talked about. We usually concentrate on the victim. We
Mhm.
usually put all of the responsibility on the victim, right? That's the question that I asked. The question I asked was still placing the responsibility of taking action on the victim. And the action that we want the victim to take is to leave the relationship. Well, what if they don't? What if they love the person? What if they
Mhm.
simply want the violence to stop and have a happy ending and have a happy life?
Mhm.
Who's responsible? Who can make that change? The person who is perpetrating the violence. And if we can all just take that from this conversation and start thinking of it that way, then we can start, creating spaces like the one that you mentioned, right? Where we actually work with those who are committing the violent act against their partner, working with them, as difficult as that might be. Because it's easier to nourish somebody who is in need than to talk to somebody who feels empowered and work with them to help them see that what they're doing is wrong, right? Like that's why when somebody does something wrong, it's easier to just put them away in jail.
And what does that do actually? What does,
Exactly.
and again, I'm not talking about people capable of killing their
Yes.
partners, right? So
Yes.
what does that actually do? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, very, very, very powerful. So let's talk about resources. Let's talk about, some of the places where people can go and find more information. Like somebody who might be in a domestic violence situation, who can they call? Where can they go? To have this type of conversations that are just so healing, transformative, and honestly, hopeful.
So I would say, regardless of where you are in the United States, the best number to call is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So you can access them online. They have an 800 number, and they have interpreters. In my understanding is in most languages. So please connect with the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You will be able to talk to somebody, and then they'll connect you to resources in your community. That is the most global, or I would say universal number if you're in the United States. And then every county or every state actually has a domestic violence and sexual assault, sometimes is the same. It's a dual coalition that is also a resource that you can call, and they will do the same. They will connect you to your local program. But like I said, every state has a domestic violence and sexual assault coalition, and then a number of, in the case of domestic violence coalitions and sexual assault, also member programs that exist throughout the state. Domestic violence programs have what they call core services. Sometimes they have shelters, they do court accompaniment, they have counseling, oftentimes, support groups for survivors, children's programs. So I think this country is actually very well resourced when it
Mhm.
comes to services. So we're lucky in that regard.
Mhm. And I just added the number for the National Domestic Violence Hotline to our comments,
Mhm.
1-800 799 That's the National Domestic Violence Hotline that people can contact and request for help in their own language. And for local resources, as Heidi was just saying, because that is important. It's important to know where to go in our own communities. Heidi, if people want to find out more information about the work that you guys are doing, where can they get in touch with
Mhm.
you? Where can they find out more information about Caminar Latino?
So Caminar Latino, Latinos United for Peace and Equity, is an organization that is based in Atlanta, Georgia. That's Caminar Latino, and the services, the direct services to survivors and their families. So if you are in the area of Atlanta, Georgia, I encourage you to reach out to Caminar Latino, and the website is caminarlatino.org. Now, I said Lupe, which is the national arm of Caminar Latino, Latinos United for Peace and Equity. And you can find us online through the Caminar Latino website. And we provide technical assistance, we do research, policy advocacy for those that work with survivors of domestic violence. We come to this work from a culturally specific lens, and really our work is in partnership, and is really a big bridge between what's happening locally in Atlanta, informing all aspects of our work. And then nationally, we get to develop resources, build evidence, advocate for policies that support survivors, etc. So we do have access to this national platform. We also house a resource center, is a national center to advance peace for children, youth, and families that really works at the intersection of domestic violence, child welfare, and custody. So really looking at how survivors that are living or experiencing domestic violence navigate the child welfare. I mentioned earlier how complicated that can be at times,
Mhm.
but also custody. How what are the challenges that they face in custody situations, and how do they navigate that system? That's a private system with a lot of challenges too, especially for folks that don't have the financial resources to be
Mhm.
well represented in court when there is a custody battle going on with
Mhm.
someone that is that is a perpetrator of violence, right? So that's our other part of our work. And we have a number of resources and grants to provide technical assistance, as I was saying, to people doing the work, advocates, organizations doing the work, to state administrators that actually distribute funding to communities, and many others. So our organization really, as I said, does work directly with survivors locally and nationally as well. And if you get in touch with us, and we'll, at a minimum, we'll be able to connect you with the best resources for you in your communities if you're not there in Atlanta.
Mhm. So caminarlatino.org, I place that on our comments as well so that you can go and check it out. You can go and visit. You can go and read about it and just continue the conversation, because I think there's a lot of power in just continuing the conversation with others out there. You never know what people are going through. You never know what kind of situations they may be experiencing in their life. And just striking conversations like I think it's really important. And starting to change that narrative of victimizing, of really like, I guess, making the evil of the victims and really placing the responsibility where it needs to be placed. I think that's powerful. If we can start having that conversation, I think we can make a transformative movement in the entire country. So I thank you so much for that, because that was to me one of the most powerful messages that you're leaving us with today. And that's the last question that I have for you today. If there's one thing that you want people to be able to take away and remember from our conversation, one message that you want to make sure that they take with them today, what would that message be?
Get involved in changing the narrative. Domestic violence is never the responsibility of the person surviving the violence. And change the narrative, get involved, do something. I think it's on all of us to change not only the narrative but behavior. Get involved in prevention strategies, work with young people, teach consent, and learn about healthy relationships. So I think it depends on all of us, to change some of these traditional gender roles and ways to frankly excuse the violence. It's going to take all of us.
Consent, boundaries, accountability, changing the narrative, accountability. So many powerful messages, Heidi, that you brought us this morning. Thank you so much. At the end of the day, hope, right?
Mhm.
Hope and understanding. It's what really everything speaks to me. Like, there's hope in the future generations. As parents, we have a responsibility. As young people, we have a responsibility. As a system, we have a responsibility. And if we look at it through that lens, then we realize that we can make a difference, that we can make a change, because it comes back to us. It's not something that's outside, that's happening, that we are powerless, but rather very powerful and can do something about it and change it. So thank you so much for bringing that message this morning to all of us. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for making the time and the space to we observe Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and to raise awareness, and yeah, get involved with our communities in this way. Very meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are done with that segment of our Conectados this morning, and thank you again, Heidi, for being with us this morning. We are going to take a quick break. I will be back to let you know what's happening around our county this weekend. Stay tuned. I'll be right back. two things that we just heard strongly about in our conversation with Heidi. And I want you to carry on to that message, and I really want you to grab onto that message and the things that we can do and how we can transform by placing accountability where accountability needs to be placed. And we are about to go into our segment where we look at everything that's happening this weekend here in Howard County. If you want to learn more about Girl Scouts, what they do, the kind of activities that they engage with, the commitment necessary to participate, and whether they are the right group for your daughter or not, you can join them this Friday, October 25th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at Girl Scouts of Central Maryland, located at 6540 Washington Boulevard in Elkridge. It's a free event for you to come and engage with the Girl Scouts and explore what Girl Scouts is all about and if it is the right club for you and your family. This event is open to the public, starts at 5:30 p.m. Do you enjoy fishing? How about fishing at night? This Friday, you have the opportunity to experience fishing after hours at Centennial Park. Bring your fishing pole, your chair, your flashlight, and everything else you might need to enjoy this experience. The cost is $5 per person, and you can reserve your spot visiting Howard County Parks and Rec website. The Women's Club of Laurel invites you and your family to come out this Friday evening and enjoy a two-movie special celebrating Halloween with Hocus Pocus 1 and 2 starting at 7 p.m. Bring your blankets and come early to grab your favorite spot. If you would like to bring a chair, you're welcome to do so, but just know that you'll be asked to sit in the back to avoid blocking the view for those who are in the front. The admission is free, and there will be popcorn, candy, and drinks for sale at $1 each. The address is 384 Main Street in Laurel. The 8th annual STEM Festival is happening this Saturday, October 26th at the Maryland International School, a free event designed for students from first grade all the way through 12th grade that are interested in exploring opportunities in science and technology. The event is from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. and the address is Old Washington Road right here in Elkridge. This Saturday, come to the free expungement clinic and holistic well-being resource fair at the library in Laurel. This is a free event that brings you the opportunity to connect with legal counsel, health resources, and more. The fair runs from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. at the Laurel Library located at 507 7th Street. And the Fall Festival of the City of Laurel is happening this Saturday from 1 to 3 at the Laurel's Town Center, located at 14828 Baltimore Avenue. Everyone is welcome and invited to share in the fun. And that's all that's happening this weekend in Howard County. And that's it for our show today as well. If you would like to have events included, or you would like to pitch story ideas, or you would like to be a guest, please contact me at info@crisoviedo.com. That's info@crisoviedo.com. And if you have ideas, if you have comments, if you know someone, a family member, a neighbor, a teacher, coworker, anyone who has a life story that everyone should know about, please contact me, info@crisoviedo.com. And if you enjoyed the show today, and if you found value in the information that was shared today, please share it with others so that they can also connect with it and share it with their families and friends. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I am Cris Oviedo. Thank you for being in the space. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful Thursday and a beautiful weekend that's coming up shortly. Take care, everyone.